those second 50 years, the ones that Joan Chittister has good things to say and bad things to say for her own congregation, probably apply for us. We really locked into the work of the church. That's not a bad thing. Can you imagine an immigrant church as it was in a period from, say, 1900 to the 50s? Was there a Catholic that didn't have access to Catholic education? Religious women staffing schools unbelievably with great success, Catholic hospitals, Catholic agencies that looked after you and prepared you to assimilate into U.S. life. It's an extraordinary story. The old historians, when I was back in my student days, used to refer to this period in American Catholic history as the age of bricks and mortar. We built, and we hoped we were building in such a way that it would last. But was it an illusion, this success? We were awfully successful, but institutionally, one would say, perhaps in such a way that our spirit was not quite to the forefront as it might have been. We were identifiable as the Catholic Church, but how Franciscan were we? And that's where this third block of time becomes so important. And of course, I think the real touchstone becomes for us how established in a way American Catholics have become. In this second period, say 1908 to 1958 roughly, we are on the verge of electing the first United States Roman Catholic president. I mean, that would have been unthinkable to those first friars who came here in the 19th century. It wouldn't have been so believable to immigrant Catholics here for much of the 20th century, first half. So we're in another realm entirely when, in that third era, our age, so to speak, the one that most of us have lived through in some way, we're looking at an era of renewal and retrieval, heralded above all by the convening of the Second Vatican Council. And although it occurs in the 1960s, we know that the preparation for it was going on decades ago. One of the most powerful things for us as Franciscans about Vatican II was the retrieval, I'm talking to the head director of the Franciscan Institute, of Franciscan sources. Now, I'm not saying that our order, our men in this province or anywhere around the world didn't understand the importance of Francis in the 100 years that precedes the Council of Vatican II. But we didn't have at our disposal the kinds of material that we have now to help us understand who Francis and Clare and the entire movement would be. And the explosion of Franciscan scholarship over the last 50 years is extraordinary. It's affected who we are as friars and how we identify ourselves to the church and to the world. This has been extraordinary. Another aspect of the Second Vatican Council was, of course, an entirely different way for the Catholic Church to look at the world at large, ecumenically. And has been written by one of my professors, Jared Wicks, recently in an article about Vatican II. Gaudium and Spes, the famous constitution and the church around the world, looked at the peoples of the world. Now this is describing the Catholic Church. We looked at the peoples of the world with a loving gaze. That's how he wrote that. You know, we weren't in that fortress mentality of 100 years before as Catholics, or even 50 years before. We were turning toward people in the way that Francis and Clare would have turned toward people. So that Vatican II, in many ways, comports with who we are as Franciscans. It was an extraordinary, even revolutionary moment, and I don't use that word, casually. But I would say also this period now in which we find ourselves, this period of an increasingly international Franciscan identity, you heard our brother Jose, is also a period of certain mixed outcomes. We are, as American Catholics, in a very different place, and consequently as friars and sisters. We are diminished in numbers. This is a many times told story. I don't let it depress me, but it's a reality. Our identity as Catholics is, in a post-Vatican II period now, subject to many, many barriers and divisions. And we're going through change that is runaway. Historians sometimes call it macro-historical change. I used to tell the undergraduates in Quincy, that means really, really big changes happening really, really, really fast. And that's not about to stop at any time soon. So we're not the immigrant church, but we are certainly a church that is looking at the world in new ways and finding ourselves not only blessed to be where we are, but greatly challenged. There's an old French expression about the more things change, the more they stay the same. And you know, those friars, our brothers 150 years ago, were looking at some things that in a way couldn't be more different. I mean, we couldn't be more different than those first 9 friars who lived in that first friary in Totopolis in 3 rooms. Give them that a moment's thought. 9 friars in 3 rooms. But
one of them was for the garden.
yeah, and which is another slight difference. But the whole reality of what it was like for them and what it's like today couldn't be more different. And yet, what did they deal with? Evangelizing and carrying the faith into another land. Immigration, exile, and they might have been described, as we sometimes use the word today, as refugees. They dealt with problems of language and culture. They dealt with problems of inclusion and exclusion and all kinds of barriers. It wasn't easy for them to cross that line to help Native Americans. They weren't German speaking. Or cross that line eventually that would involve them with African Americans, and you continue filling in the blanks. They had to deal with identity and who they really were. They had to deal with dislocation. They had to deal with the problems of church and state, one of my favorite topics. And have you been watching elections lately? Watching campaigns? I don't think religion is exactly, remember the old adage, you get together with your family, okay, no one can talk about politics or religion, and then everyone did. It's still the same. Warfare, violence, and the differences between the rich and the poor, or today the very, very rich and extremely poor, more and more of them. They faced it, and we are too. They faced their situations along these themes in different ways, but these are perennials in human situations, and I think in some ways our Franciscan presence now has got to be more prophetic than it ever was. I would say that what's distinctive about our 150 years is that we went beyond our German roots and beyond our German American roots and beyond our doubts and our fears, and we took risks. We took risks as friars here in the Midwest and in the South. And we did it early. In the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s, this fledgling mission and brand new province founded a school, took on parishes, reached out to Native Americans, sent missionaries to China, that's as early as the 1880s, and decided that there was a province out there in California that needed resuscitating. That's amazing to me. So that kind of grit, guts like that, is the stuff of which we are made.